All right, hi everyone. I said I'm back with another discussion about the world of comic books. I figured I said I mentioned in my previous video that this would be kind of focused on female heroes and other issues related to it. I'm just going to call this the woke agenda because it always seems like Hollywood is trying to shoehorn in various characters from various backgrounds just to say, hey, look at this person. I said, look who's part of the team. And while that's fine, you can't. I said they've kind of made too many stereo. I said you don't want to be, a stereotype of everything because that was the problem with like Blue Beetle was just like, yes, he was definitely from an awkward, Hispanic family, but one thing I always kind of find interesting is the inclusion of female versions of already established heroes. Um, it's kind of always strange when they often come out of nowhere, um, in the world. I mean, they could in theory have been introduced, and it's like, okay, we're gonna make this character is that this background woman character, the secret identity of this new heroine, and I'm thinking, okay, because you know they because you never know what they're going to be. Kind of like when they brought in Batgirl, back in the I said the Adam West Batman era. They said they did it as an attempt to actually save, the ratings, and because they said, and that was like her season was the last one there. And I do get, it's kind of nice that she wanted to say, I want to help. I use my father's resources, and insights, but it just kind of seems a little bit out of left field. I mean, when they actually did the animated series called The Batman, they actually had to introduce Batgirl before Robin due to legal rights because they were filming Teen Titans, so they couldn't actually use Robin for a while. And even Batman was like, "Okay, why are you here?" I mean, he quickly is able to actually deduce who she is, and that is kind of interesting. I mean, at least the old school Adam West version, played by Yvonne Craig, she at least had a better way of actually disguising herself in the fact that she wore they said the red wig. So, because there aren't that many people with red hair in the world, especially in a very crowded city like that, you definitely would stand out in a crowd. But essentially, Barbara Gordon, in the animated sense, often seems to have red hair herself, and then they just kind of said, and no one thinks that's a problem. But you know, I can always, it's not saying it's a, but one other things I would definitely would say can be a little interesting is, just making a new version of a character and they just decide to make it female because it's like, oh, we don't have this many characters there because they did actually have a female Green Lantern called Limelight. It said and Jade, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, you know, they want to definitely be able to stand out, from this thing. Most people, it said, it seems like in various Lantern Corps, just kind of go by their names, or in this case, if they're trying to protect their identities, they're just called Green Lantern, Green Lantern. But so that would be kind of confusing if all of a sudden, several of them actually kind of came together, you know, pursuing, individual crooks that decide to unite. So it's like here we go. But I can't really think of too many examples where you actually have a female character who essentially becomes, gets a male counterpart, uh, and said, other than maybe when they did Justice League Unlimited, they actually introduced Hawkman in the last season. But then again, they were trying to shoehorn the fact that it said yes, it says Hawkgirl has someone to basically settle down with and let Green Lantern just have Vixen and you know they eventually were able to kind of reconcile everything, but was just like you know couldn't he have like chosen something else? Called himself. like another type of bird. It's like kind of weird to actually kind of copy things, and you just never know because I definitely wouldn't say like the Arrowverse is a pretty bad example of trying to shoehorn in various female characters, for everything. Um, well, it was kind of nice to actually see Supergirl, being established. They never really try to capitalize on the fact of, Superman is still out there, like leaving her more gifts, saying, say you did a pretty good job. It was just like, Superman was somewhere, but in the first season, you just kind of saw silhouettes or him from a thing. They literally even showed him just lying on his back, and you just saw his, boots and a little bit of a leg, and that was it. It's almost like they were trying to see what would work before they actually casted someone. And they kind of made it seem as though that when there was a moment when Superman thought he was fighting Zod, Supergirl was actually able to, take him down. Looked like she didn't even, break a sweat. And and for me, that's really absurd. Because, if Superman's able to definitely lift, millions of tons, like it's nothing, I said, and, it seems like, if they just do casually punch each other, there is still, the laws of physics, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And while there is some degree of durability on each other, um, it is quite possible to still, like, if to actually just knock someone clear across it, they actually clear across, a city, because they actually said like Major Force actually had enough power to knock Superman across, three states, but he wasn't actually, nearly as strong. So the question is, if you were somehow like hit someone with like Thor's hammer and there was no magical elements, per se, it's still a very, you know, it's still a very dense hammer being swung very quickly and with a said and by someone who's insanely strong. And that was just did never made any sense. Like it was just, it's like yes, here's all the girl power, but you know, it kind of said I really didn't read and say any of the comics to show what their dynamics actually were, but it just seems like um, Supergirl was always portrayed as being much smaller than Superman, and yet if she was able to whip him without using any special tactics, because some well placed nerve strikes and said can definitely cripple a person very quickly, but we never really got much of an idea of it said where each types of powers may stand. So it's almost as though if you were to say, always would say Superman's the Man of Steel. Well, what grade of steel would you say? Because last thing you want to find out is that I forget exactly what kind of alloys are, but if one would suggest say um, that what like Superman was meant to be high grade, surgical steel um, with maybe a lot of tempering things in it like vanadium and molybdenum for added power. And Supergirl only had one of those things, and it was a significant difference in the quality of the steel. We just never got that. Then I said another kind of issue was kind of weird when they actually tried to keep Batwoman alive. I mean, they never really tried to hint, where exactly Batman was in some kind of thing. It said some capacity other than leaving behind maybe one thing at the start of the series. And then they had that weird moment where Lucas Fox, was kind of in a state of limbo. It's like, well, I guess you're dead, if I'm talking to you. And, it's like he had plenty of chances to make his return and, in critical things, but it always had to be focused, on Kate Kane. I mean, yes, it is quite important for that, definitely to show everything. But I think half the time, you know, as I said, they all were always trying to show the growth of other characters, and then shoehorn in all the lesbian stuff, which is fine. But it's just like it's, it's a, she barely even said much of anything other than one episode when a guy, tried to kiss her and she's like, no, thank you. And even with essentially, when they got the second Batwoman, she was pretty much, maybe not as tough, but essentially like, yes, here's another lesbian trying to find her way in life, and we also threw in the fact that she was black. I'm thinking, okay. And then they kind of did that weird thing with like her half brother trying to become the new Joker, and I'm like, oh great, they're trying to shoehorn everything in, and maybe not even relying upon any new characters. It's like same universe, but the lead is someone different, and that's always just kind of sad, in my opinion. If you can, get classic villains is one thing, but if there has been a decent amount of time between the end of one superhero's run and the rise of the next one, someone could take things in a slightly different way, kind of like how all it said various Robins decided to go by different names once they reach adulthood, because no one really would know what essentially someone like Red Hood would be if no one realized, okay, he said he was from Gotham. So if he was in a totally different city, you would not have known he was part of, Batman's crew. I mean, you could have used totally different themed gadgets um, to get the job done. But but then again, there is a pretty sad, agenda to try to basically appeal to every audiences that while alienating others. And one character kind of comes to mind was actually Dreamer from Supergirl, and that was just a mess. I mean, she could have been, just another hero, trying to find her way, but they had to say, "Oh, she's a transgender woman," you and to be honest, Nicole Maines does not look like she was ever a man. I'm not entirely sure her backstory. I didn't want to look it up, but she didn't have like the major Adam's apple. She moved, very much like that of a woman. So unless someone actually pointed anything out about the character and the actress, it could have gone there. I mean, someone like Jesse James Keitel, when she says often portrays trans feminine characters, you can still say yes, she is, can look very much like a woman, but you definitely, you know, kind of look at her. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, he said, I get it. Yeah, they're trans. It says she's just a transgender person, and either this is what role she's going to play, he said, or not. Because in Big Sky, it was maybe only brought up, maybe once, and that was just when she was kidnapped. Said there really weren't too many, or at least I didn't watch the last season before everything was canceled, but it was just like they weren't trying to say, yes, here's, trans representation. They basically were essentially showing, not telling. And the whole thing with Dreamer was just the fact that, it said her mother was an alien from a race that only one daughter per generation gets the powers, and yet, she apparently it said made the costume for Dreamer, but essentially left, her other daughter Maeve, out to dry, because when you pretty much figure, this is the only option in the family for someone to inherit the powers, they prepare for everything, from day one. Okay, and if someone basically tells you, no, it's actually someone else that defies all logic. I mean, they could have at least said, um, they could have either at least said it was something to do with the fact that, the girls were a hybrid, said hybrids, and you could have actually just made them both, that kind of power. Like something within the father's human DNA triggered it, and said triggered the power, because they actually showed a future version of Toyman actually being able to use dream energy himself, like through gadgets. So perhaps that could have been very similar. 'Cause, it's one thing, and I get, you have to appeal to every single, market, for everything. It's like, hey, we're going to introduce these very gay neighbors, or this person's going to be revealed to be transgender. I'm like, you really don't need that. I mean, if you're not going to be focusing on those elements, you could have just had a regular person instead of a normal gender instead there. Because last thing you want to do is shoehorn someone in, kind of like the cousin Oliver syndrome, and everything goes downhill from there. Because you just never know what everything is going to be. Like if there's more questions than answers, don't do it. They say don't do it because I definitely would say that we do need more said super females out there, especially if someone would just say, "Hey, we don't have a shapeshifter on this team," or "We don't have someone that uses chemical weapons." They could have easily put someone in there and no big deal. It's like conveniently this is who wanted to enlist in whatever superhero team, and because I think in like Justice League Unlimited there was only like a handful of female characters, and most of the time they were highly sexualized. I mean, essentially, Supergirl, you know, hardly wore more than what Wonder Woman had. Vixen said was definitely wearing very form-fitting costumes. Black Canary was in her traditional things. It said it said the actual character Fire literally has it said when she demonstrated her powers, she essentially loses her clothes and is replaced by a green fire bikini. And I'm like, okay, because because you want to have you know women that can get the job done, but they're not relying upon their feminine wilds every single time. Because you could easily have that will they, won't they, get together kind of scenario, and that's just that's just terrible. I mean, if they could very easily introduce, the love interest of other characters, and it's like, okay, it's not that big of a deal, or in theory, it's like, there's just not. It's just almost like they seem to have said be totally separate on mission. So it's like, yeah, they're never going to really kind of get together. It's like one person is East Coast, there's West Coast. So, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't actually work together. I mean, it would be interesting to see one male character, um, maybe surrounded by a few female characters because their skills just happens to complement each other, and the male character, is polite to all of them, and doesn't there doesn't try anything. It's not so much that they couldn't find an all girl team. It's just maybe everyone they were just stretched too thin to have an all girl team for one area, and they just brought in this one kind of character. But you never know who's exactly going to be included. I mean, I can understand, some characters can definitely take up the mantle of past heroes, kind of like what they did in Stargirl. The whole point with the immediate team was that with the exception of Hourman, was just everyone taking up the fallen costumes of the JSA, and it was definitely very interesting to see how tough Wildcat was, and the fact that Doctor Midnight was very intelligent, but I still had a lot of problems actually with the first episode of Stargirl because they had Doctor Fate and Sand on their team. Said able to actually see into the future at certain points, but they couldn't actually see they were gonna die. And they also had a version of the Flash that was shown time traveling at the very when the series was over. I'm like, really? You couldn't have no one warned anyone? That they were walking into a trap. So I know it's they had to basically show this is why characters aren't around, but I'm thinking it said we're talking about children, it said still technically minors, um, taking up the mantle from characters that were able to defeat everyone like it was nothing, instead of back in the day. what exactly do you think it would have? And Stargirl herself was definitely very much like the comics. She didn't really like her new stepfather, no matter what he kind of tried, at times. But and she even tried to be a little too independent, using her powers, for some degree of personal gain. But I'm thinking, that could essentially be with anyone. You know, they just decided to they just conveniently had the perfect archetype for everything. But you just kind of never definitely would say that even like in the media itself, it's always kind of strange when, a couple only has one child and it's a daughter. Very rarely do you actually see, a son coming out there, or if there is a son, maybe they have um, more sisters than he really needs. It seems like a weird kind of focus on, put the girls first, and if there is a son, it always sounds like there's something a little off about him. Like maybe he's a little bit too brash, kind of like what happened with John Connor. Then again, that could just be explained by way too much expectations. I mean, single mothers can definitely be pretty tough, on their own, but it's like said, oh, you gotta do this, prepare for the end of everything. You know, that just seems like a weird trope to always rely on. I mean, sometimes when you have say girls raised by dads, yes, they will deal with the issue of nature versus nurture. I said, but it always just kind of seems like the girls seem to have a better relationship, overall. Because you know, definitely would say that you never know what kind of heroes you're going to get. Certain characters are definitely established. Go for it. Kind of like what happened with the Power Rangers. I mean, if you see, you always know that if the season's going to have a girl, she's. I said most of the time, there's definitely going to be a Pink Ranger. Yes, there have been a few examples where they were different colors, but sometimes they actually have a lot of pink, just enough pink on them. When they had like a couple of White Rangers, they definitely had a lot of pink, and said on them. But when they actually when they actually finally had the first female Green Ranger, it was definitely setting things, differently. Although that was just to match the archive footage from Japan. I mean, they do have a series in Japan where there are two very efficient female Green Rangers, and one of them actually the first one does have a lighter kind of green, like grass green, and the other one is actually a darker green. And said, well, and sad part is she was actually prettier than the Pink Ranger, and but yet the color that she was in, you would actually expect a guy to be wearing it, and it pretty much, when they would say, hey, let's have a female Red Ranger, I'm like, no, I said that's not a good idea. Technically, the first canonical female Red Ranger betrayed everyone, and the second one was just a joke. Like, she was supposed to have this amazing power to seal evil, but yet, when she was using it, it looked like she was struggling, it said, to even use it. And it's like, really? We waited that long for that? I mean, it definitely does. You said you can definitely show, girls stepping into roles because they did have a season where, they could be any ranger they wanted, but they still knew, who was supposed to be who in the chain of command. And so eh, that's always been a slight issue because, like saying, yeah, we want to see, you know, these girls, get some kind of recognition. I'm like, that's fine, but what exactly does she bring to the table that a guy cannot? Eh, it's just like it's because you don't want her to just be. You definitely do want her to be a lot more hands-on and savvy. When they actually had Power Rangers Time Force, their Pink Ranger was actually supposed to be the leader, and definitely she could have been a very good Red Ranger on her own. She was definitely hands down. But if we've already seen someone, is actually the first female Red Ranger that they actually Is that kind of was meant to actually truly lead everything from the start. She was originally the Pink Ranger, and then it was like, here we go. It's just like, oh dear. I didn't really watch it because it the series has just been a train wreck, for so many years. But you never know what something might actually happen because someone could always create their own character to rival someone. It wouldn't really take too much to use it. I mean, if you could have someone that's definitely gender neutral, but you don't want to be in a scenario where you decide, okay, I'm gonna basically said every superhero that is in this thing will have their parent said their opposite gender parents' powers, so they have to kind of take up a difficult mantle. So it's just like kind of like what happened in Sky High. Like both parents kind of wanted their son to actually, have what they could do, but yet it kind of got a little child. They were a little childish, like the fact that, you know, it's like she was like or fly or fly. I'm thinking, oh, that's okay and all, but if you're just gonna have with the one child, you never know what could be mixed, and you don't want to just simply make the daughter have way too much power for her own good, or instead and leave a brother with not much of anything, like almost like all the hero potential from in the gene pool went to one area. But even then, you also it said if you are going to have a lot of, it says some prominent female heroes, you got to make sure they all have a chance to really shine and grow because Sailor Moon was a pretty bad example of the lead character getting way too much power and the others not so much. Because while there was, they got a slightly different ways to transform, they didn't really, I really didn't think they did anything differently that made them any different, said like from the last season that made from the first season. Yes, they had a few new attacks, but they weren't like more tactically aware. Weren't trying new tricks. It was just like, okay, yes, you have this, you have a slight change of costume, just kind of keep with the times. But Sailor Moon definitely has, other power ups that's, changed everything. Like before she actually became a permanent um, Super Sailor Scout, um, different attacks were actually used. And even when they actually showed the end of the Heart Snatchers era, she was kind of doubting herself, like she could actually defeat certain enemies without actually being in her super form, but yet she was still able to use it. But it never really gave the chance for any of the other Sailor Scouts to actually defeat anyone, or at least in terms of the original team. While there was one kind of moment where Sailor Jupiter did actually defeat an enemy on her own, it was just she was just trying to prove herself because she was having a rough time. But it always just kind of seems like everyone else is trying to go for the grand slam in baseball. It's like, yes, we've hit this character with so many other attacks, but you said they're a little shaken up. But it's like nothing happens until whatever Sailor Moon ability is actually being used. Like her special, power rod contains the essence, an essence that seems to be break through some kind of evil barrier that destroys, essentially destroys the monster like it's nothing. And we're basically when she had a type of like kind of like a diamond dust attack, you literally just kind of saw all the thing kind of crushing around the instead around the enemy, like that was just it. Like in theory, the monster had broken out of a mirror, and then this would just kind of put him back. So there really wasn't kind of like that. Like if you're gonna have, a good, a girls team, make sure they have the chance to really use it. Or you never know if they're gonna be, from the same predestined, team like Sailor Moon, or are they gonna kind of come together? Because there were times when, Supergirl and Batgirl teamed up with each other, and they're definitely not the same characters at all. It's you just never know what's going to happen. I mean, it, not saying, and well, in this case, someone said it definitely would show quite a bit of determination and spirit for a girl to take up, a man's power set or abilities, you rather than a guy, wanting to do what his mom once did. I mean, with less they mostly because it seems like the mom could be the one that has powers and she may be able to pass it down depending on which universe you're in because you just never know. And just the fact that essentially if the mom kind of has the powers, that's her DNA, in her. And essentially, when you have that connection with her over 9 months, you never know what could actually happen. So if was even some lore could actually show that if a dad has powers, it's quite that basically the unborn child could actually awaken powers in the mother. Like, okay, you do have the potential. Here's your mutant X gene or whatever they want to call it, but it's not active. In you, you might have a grandchild that does have powers, but you not so much. But if a woman decides to have kids with someone who does have power, it flips a different switch altogether. But yeah, so that's kind of all I have to say about that. I mean, I said I'm fine, with everyone, trying to support, various communities on there. Just don't, be in everyone's face, kind of like with religion or politics, and everyone will be fine. So my next video will actually is that will go into heightened attributes of humans that could possibly translate well into humans. Um, so look forward to that. All right, thank you.